Greetings. Welcome to this next installment of DEI in About Five, brought to you by Sweet Ransom Diversity Consulting, and I am Robin Sweet Ransom. All right, I'm going to talk to you about a topic that many of you have heard of, and unfortunately, many more have experienced. And that is the topic of systemic racism. And this is going to be longer than about 5 minutes. It's going to be a little bit more than that. But I promise you that the information that you'll receive will give you something to think about. Like make you go, I hadn't considered this. Or maybe I had considered this. What can I do to make a difference in my organization? And we're going to explore it with the groundwater approach in mind. And I want you to ask yourself, what's in the water? What is in America's groundwater? All right, let's get into it. So, when you take the full journey with me, and you're not just getting the appetizer that I'm giving you, and you'll get the full meal, we'll really go into a lot of detail on confronting racism in this country. And we're encouraging you to just take a look in the mirror. Take an honest look at racism in this country. Take a look at your own organization. Think about how you can be the change that you want to see, and then brainstorm some collaborative solutions. And remember that when you take this journey, the solution that you come up with may very well be unique and may even come from you. Okay, so what does systemic racism even mean? Well, it's discrimination or unequal treatment of a particular ethnic group or groups. Its effects can be seen in all aspects of society, the school system, the judicial system, the medical system, and everything in between. And those who are most impacted by this are Blacks and Indigenous people, Indigenous meaning the Native American population, and they are a part of the BIPOC population. For some of you, this may be a new term, or maybe you've heard it but really didn't know what it meant. It means Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The groundwater approach is something that was designed by the Racial Equity Institute. And it's a metaphor that illustrates how racially structured society causes racial inequity that looks the same across all or many different systems. The socioeconomic differences doesn't explain the racial inequity. The inequities can't be explained by education or behavior. It is there regardless of these things that probably should make someone fare better, but it doesn't. For example, you may think someone who is wealthy and famous wouldn't experience the effects of systemic racism as someone who is poor and disadvantaged, and that is not the case. Let's just face it. And remember, I encourage you to look in the mirror. The United States is built on racism. Okay? Some of you may not want to hear that, but I'm going to speak the truth to you. It is. And if you have not been the recipient of it, then it's easy for you to dismiss and invalidate the feelings of others and think that it doesn't exist. And it does. And facing it doesn't mean that this country is a horrible place. It does mean that we have work to do. There's a groundwater problem, and we need groundwater solutions. Okay. So let's take this metaphor a little further and think about this. What would you do if you were walking along by a lake and you noticed one dead fish on the shores? Probably wouldn't think too much about it. What if you see a handful of dead fish. And then you observe that it's not just this lake that's impacted, but it's happening all over in seemingly unconnected lakes. What would you think? You might exclaim, Houston, we have a problem. Why do we have all of these dead fish? Right? You would want to get to the heart of the matter, wouldn't you? After all, many of us love and eat fish. But if fish are popping up dying, we're thinking, oh, something wrong here. We don't want to touch that. We need to get to the heart of it. And that's how I want us to feel about America's groundwater problem, which is systemic racism. Consider this. I don't want to tell you what to think. I want you to explore this on your own. Which race or races tends to fare worse in healthcare? They tend to fare worse in the schooling system. Which race or races tends to fare worse in the justice system? Has a race come to mind for you? Maybe more than one race. Has that come to mind for you? Do you see a pattern where you're thinking about the same group or groups of people? What is the cause? Is the groundwater contaminated? If so, what can you do? For the purposes of this brief DEI in about 5, which is probably going to be more in about 10 or so, we're going to focus on the healthcare industry. But as I said to you, systemic racism is felt in numerous systems. Let's talk about COVID-19 and how it impacted a beautiful woman by the name of Rana Munjan, or you could say Raina. She was a 30-year-old social studies teacher from New York, and she complained that she wasn't breathing normally. Something was wrong with her. Unfortunately, she was ignored by the EMTs, the urgent care workers, as well as the doctors. And sadly, she was denied the adequate care that she needed and deserved and became gravely ill. And consequently, tragically, she died on April 27th, 2020, of complications caused by COVID-19. Now, notice when she died. She died on April 27th in New York. By this time, America knew about COVID, right? They shut everything down on March 13th, I believe it was, 2020. And New York had a lot of cases. So her situation should have been given a second look. Hey, let's see if she has this. And sadly, those of the BIPOC population died in greater numbers per capita than those of their white counterparts. Why is this? And think about this. Rana was an educated woman. She was a social studies teacher. No doubt she was middle class. And she had insurance. Why was she not given the care that she so deserved and needed? Remember, I said the systemic racism cannot be just summed up in a nutshell as maybe this only affects poor people. No, or uneducated people. No, it is affecting a particular population, regardless of those things sometimes, oftentimes. You know what? Let's take it further. Per the CDC, pregnancy-related deaths among Blacks and Indigenous people are 2 to 3 times higher than they are for their white counterparts. Why is this? In this so-called developed nation, why are women, Black women and Indigenous women specifically, dying doing something as simple as giving birth? Whereas in some developing nations, they're faring better. The Association of American Medical Colleges recognizes that there is a problem, and they're supporting innovative research to eliminate the inequities plaguing mothers of color. And you think that this only happens to the poor people, maybe, or those not known? Consider this. When giving birth, millions of Black women are disbelieved by doctors. Even Serena Williams, who is wealthy and famous and educated, nearly died after initially being ignored when she requested a CT scan. So picture this. If any woman is in tune with her body, it's Serena Williams. And she became aware that she's susceptible to blood clots. And she let the doctors know that this is a problem for her. And she also knew that a way to prevent the clots from forming is to have a heparin drip. So when she went in to labor, she tried to have her baby vaginally, and it turns out that she needed a C-section. After having the C-section, she began to experience the fact that it was hard for her to breathe, and she was concerned. And she also noticed that she hadn't been given a heparin drip. And so she told the medical professionals that she felt off, she was concerned that she may be experiencing blood clots, and she wanted them to give her a CT scan to double check. But in the meantime, give her what she knew would have worked for her in the past. And this nurse had the nerve to tell her that the meds that she was on was making her crazy. Serena had to continually advocate for herself before finally the nurses and the doctors, and specifically, gave her the CT scan that she asked for. And one of the reasons I'll say this is they didn't want to give her the CT scan. I mean, that they didn't want to give her the heparin drip or give her anything to what do we call it, blood thinners, is because she'd had the surgery and they were concerned that it would cause her to bleed. Well, you know what? She was coughing and coughing. It was hard for her to get her breath, and she ended up busting the stitches and had to go in and have that repaired. But finally, they listened to the woman, and she was given the CT scan. And what did they discover? Blood clots in her lungs, the very thing she was telling them about. But they didn't want to listen to her. Now, and she had great insurance. So great insurance, wealthy, famous, educated, and she couldn't get the help that she needed when she first asked about it and asked for it. So what that tells you is those other factors don't necessarily matter. What is going on? And I bet you a white woman, especially with all the resources that Serena had, wouldn't have had to go through all of that. And I dare say one without all of her resources wouldn't have had to go through that. She would have been listened to. Now, am I calling these healthcare workers racist? I'm not calling them that, but I am saying we need to look into what's going on, because somewhere along the line, we're being biased when it comes to Black women specifically and people of color in general. So what can be done? How can we end systemic racism in the healthcare system? Well, it can be attacked from multiple angles. Expand unbiased healthcare access to each and every person, and reform medical education and training that still has anti-racist undercurrents that are being taught to medical professionals. And let me back up and say something. I would be remiss if I did not mention this. The end of February this year, I was having a hard time breathing. I couldn't walk a few steps without feeling out of breath, which is not normal. I love to walk and walk regularly. So I went into the emergency room, and I happen to have Kaiser, which is great insurance. And I saw how crowded that emergency room was, and I didn't want to stay. I decided maybe I should come back. But before doing that, I went to the person who was admitting people, and I explained to him the symptoms that I was having, and I was thinking about maybe coming back when they're less crowded because I didn't think it was that serious, whatever I was experiencing. And I was just feeling like maybe I'm getting older, and maybe that's what's going on. I don't know. And so he said to me, no, from what you described, you need to stay here. And he whispered to me, I will put you up ahead in front of everybody else because this sounds serious. Now I will mention this. It shouldn't matter, but I will mention this. He was a very kind Caucasian gentleman, and he took care of me. And they did put me up in front of everyone else, and they ran a bunch of tests. And then another doctor, so a doctor, he was reading the test results, and things seemed normal to him. And so he was going to send me home with an inhaler. And I don't have asthma. But I was thinking, okay, he's thinking maybe my lungs are inflamed or whatever the thing is. But then he said, you know what? And I account this to prayer. God was looking out for me because I was too ignorant to know what to do. I was ready to go home. He said, you know what? I want you to take a lap around the emergency room, back in the back where they have us, not in the waiting room. And let's see what happens then. So he had a nurse go with me, and they had me attached to this monitor, and we walked around, and it was so hard for me to make that lap. I was so out of breath. My numbers were through the roof. They brought me back and said, you know what? You need a CT scan. I didn't even know to ask for that, like Serena did. They got me in for the CT scan, and the results came back that evening. And it said that I had multiple blood clots in both lungs, and we had no clue where they came from. Later, we found out, as Serena found out when she found out she had a problem with blood clots, it started in my leg, and I hadn't had any symptoms, no swelling, no none of that. What I'm saying to you is it doesn't happen 100% across the board where Black women are dismissed or discounted. No, it doesn't. But it happens far too many times. And I'm grateful. I'm giving a plug for Kaiser that I was taken good care of. And I was there in the hospital for 2 days. I started feeling better immediately once they put me on the blood thinners. And now I'm supposed to be on blood thinners for 3 months. I've already got 1.5 months down. I got another 1.5 months to go. And I feel great. And I'm able to get back to my routine of walking. And I love it. So let's wrap this up and talk about what we can do to stem this tide, what you can do, whatever organization you're a part of, where you see that the groundwater is contaminated, something has gotten into your water. So to help students, one urban school district recognized that because it's systemic, meaning it's affecting different systems, they needed to partner with law enforcement, civil rights leaders, and economic developers to try to attack this problem. In another city, to affect systemic change, churches, academic institutions, community organizations, and local government have connected to attack this problem. In another, epidemiologists are partnering with economic developers to dismantle a racist system that leads to disease. For example, oftentimes factories that are emitting pollution are in lower income neighborhoods. And there was a study done that some of the Black children in this particular neighborhood was developing asthma at alarming rates, and it could be tied to the plants that were in their area. Mm-hmm. So, who can your organization partner with? Right? What can you do? Because SRD is about solutions, pointing out the problem and then coming up with some solutions. Because while systemic racism realistically may never totally leave this country, it's going to take Jesus Christ to do that. In the meantime, we can do something. And I want you to remember that diversity plus you equals solutions. Okay, I know this was a little heavy discussion, but sometimes we need something to shake us up a little bit and diversify the information that I share with you. So I welcome you to contact me and partner with me, and together we can do our part to end systemic racism, even if it's just in our organization. All right, see you soon on DEI in about 5.